Why remain bullish on Nvidia?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of reasons to still like the company. I mean, they've driven accelerated compute about 1,000x over the last 10 years, and they continue to be the leaders in the space. And AI is right now just too important of a area to let up the gas. And so I think that the large companies will still spend. I think there's a tension of like, just, what does spending more mean? And does that meet expectations? And that's what the market's really going to be focused on going forward. And so I think like there's a lot of great reasons to like the stock long term. I think that at the same time, you have to remember that semiconductors are very cyclical and they're also secular. So I think that's part of our job to navigate the environment.
So basically, brace yourself for potential short-term volatility, but longer term, you're still bullish on money coming into the likes of Nvidia. But does it broaden out? At the moment, it's felt like Nvidia is the only picks and shovels game in town. You started seeing Broadcom doing relatively well on some AI wins. What do you make of Nvidia really remaining the main place to win on AI?
Yeah, well, I think that the reason why NVIDIA has been so good in terms of it's because it's a platform, right? It's not just a chip. And so they have a big ecosystem with lots of developers writing on their code and CUDA. And so it's all built like an ecosystem platform. And so I think that's why it's such a defensible business. It's available everywhere. It's ubiquitous on the cloud. You can have it on-prem, and they've got great support for their chips. And so I think that's largely the reason. I think it could be changing in terms of the complexion going forward is more concentrated among the hyperscale players, and they're very sophisticated buyers of chips. They can do a lot of their own software. And so I think there will always be a balance between the hyperscale making their own chips with like significant volumes. Like you've seen Google with their TPU, that's very aimed at search. Yeah. And so I think that will continue, in other ways. And so I think they can coexist essentially.
I like that point that you've been making. And we were just hearing how DataTrek is seeing the same thing, that there is a willingness on a capital expenditure perspective coming from hyperscalers. You were in a number of those hyperscalers, Microsoft, Meta, for example, Alphabet. And Meta seemed to manage to nuance the argument of why they put money in there. Whereas Alphabet, people were worried about just spending CapEx at all costs. What do you make of the hyperscalers' decision to keep on putting money in?
Yeah, I think that Mark did a nice job of kind of illuminating why he's spending so much in AI, like with personalized chatbots and like how that can go through the platform. I think that you shouldn't count Google out at the same time. And they have a lot of AI expertise. They've been leaders in the field. They have great chips as well. And so, I think that it's too early to call who's going to be the winner or loser. They all have big platforms and user bases where they can scale their AI investments. And so, I think it's too early to call like who's going to win or lose. But at the same time, they all have really great businesses.
Return on AI. ROAI is this horrible acronym that's suddenly coming into the marketplace. What do you make of, though, the returns that we need to start seeing? You're a key holder in Apple. I think, again, T Rowe Price overall is about the 7th biggest holder of Apple stock out there. That company, again, managing to tell us why they can be an AI bet. Where does the money end up flowing in terms of return on an AI investment?
Yeah, I think that we'll be looking for return on AI investment. I think Apple specifically is in a great position because they're kind of the ecosystem owner, right? So they can integrate great technologies into their phones, into their hardware, and just like they did with Google Search. And so they didn't have to develop Google Search, but they definitely benefit from users using Google Search. And so ChatGPT is the same thing. Going forward, they don't have to develop a frontier model. They can integrate it with their phones. Now, I think you can argue whether long-term a company should own the frontier model here, but right now Apple's strategy is really focused on what they're really good at, which I think is design and integration with your life of their products and services. And so it's an interesting way to like be a capital light player in this kind of AI proliferation here.
It's interesting that you're in Salesforce, and that's been a company that's trying to show off its AI prowess, but make clear that they are going to be able to reap rewards from their investment. Do you think it can?
I think that Salesforce is a really sticky software company. I don't think it's going anywhere. It's kind of like their kind of game to lose, I think, at this point. And so I think they have a good moat. They have AI products that are coming out. I think the question is, like, how do they price them? How do they drive ROI for their customers? And I think the whole space is kind of going through this seat versus consumption of AI. And so like if AI works too well, you might not have many seats that you need. So I think there's that business model that's being figured out. But I do think that if you look at startups that are in the space, it can be hard for them to get into large enterprises where Salesforce sits, just because you need to let them into your whole system, and that can be actually a pretty big moat.
Well said. There has been other companies that we've been questioning how much they can align themselves with the AI tailwinds. One of them is Cisco, for example. Dell, initially we thought, yes, really within this ecosystem, they're going to be there for the servers, for the networking. And then every now and then we get caught off guard and feel that perhaps they're not so well placed. What do you make of like the bottoming out story of a Cisco, for example?
Yeah, well, I think that what we've seen is that kind of legacy tech has in some ways reinvented itself like Dell and become an AI beneficiary. I think here Cisco has been largely kind of not on the AI beneficiary list. And I think in the recent quarter, they have some kind of AI revenue coming through. The business is bottoming. It's a value idea. It's got a lot of a good amount of cash flow and dividend yield. And so from that aspect, it adds a little bit to the portfolio that, the rest of the tech stocks might not offer. And so, I think that there's a place for various stocks in portfolio construction, and with bottoming fundamentals and potentially like an attractive valuation, it could be good.
You've been great at articulating why you believe AI is such a winning story, but juxtapose that with the overall macro picture here. We see the market get hit on the fact of whether or not we will have interest rate cuts. How much do you factor that in the here and now when you're looking at a portfolio allocation?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an area that you can't ignore. The macro is super important. You have to be aware of like what's going on top down. At the same time, I think that we kind of take it stock by stock and look at where expectations are, like the likelihood that they beat expectations, how well the company is positioned. So no matter even like what direction the macro is going, like you should be able to like create alpha either way, just by relative selection of stocks. And so, when I think about kind of Nvidia, like a lot of it, it's going to be a really big print here. Like we've never had this amount of debate, I think, in terms of, are we kind of near the cyclical peak or is it going to continue? And so, we do a lot of fundamental work to understand like kind of where the products are positioned and how to think about the setup of the stock.
Look, when you're managing the Science and Technology Fund, does it suddenly amaze you that the whole world now thinks Nvidia is a macro moment? Its earnings might dictate the rest of the benchmarks.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal moment. I mean, if you think about it, the stock has just been amazing. I remember I started covering it about 7-8 years ago, and you would never have thought it would be $3 trillion. So everybody has like underestimated the company, through like multiple cycles. And so it's been, phenomenal because, they offer so much value. And like we've seen this like kind of AI vision of accelerated compute play out. And so I think everyone now recognizes it. And so, it is pretty phenomenal. And I think that part of the reason why Nvidia is so important is because there are a lot of AI multipliers through the economy, and there's a lot of market cap creation because Nvidia is doing well. And there is this like kind of idea that long-term value creation, productivity driving through the economy. So I think it's a big moment for the market for sure. And so we're excited to see what happens next.
Political risk in any way affect that?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Political risk in any way affect that?
The macro risk?
Yeah, the politics, the element that maybe we have a change in the White House. Would that in any way change the innovation focus?
Yeah, it's really hard to kind of call politics, I think. I think there's a tension of like how much you regulate AI and Nvidia as such a dominant player, perhaps, pushing computing versus like we are in an AI space race kind of with other countries. And at the same time, we're trying to kind of stymie China's efforts to develop AI. Like, I think that we can't also, it's hard to then also like kind of restrict our own companies. So my view is that like the space is moving so fast. We're trying to push the envelope here. I don't think, politics will really change that, given how important AI is to the economy in the future.